Episode 301, Starvation and Conflict Averted. This is The Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Winter has arrived here in Tasmania. Checked the temperature today to say that it was 10.3 but felt like minus 3.3. A very chilly minus 13 degree wind chill factor. On an up note though, the rain has started. We are considered to have a Mediterranean climate here in Tassie, and autumn took a while to wind up. Warm, above averagely warm, with more forecast in that sort of range. La Nina is still pumping moisture onto the mainland, which meant we were a little short on the short side for sometimes last year. The predictability of weather is not what it once was. Climate change is affecting us all, to greater and lesser degrees. The early heat waves in India this year are far more serious than a latish start to the winter rains in Tasmania. The former has killed people, the latter has not. And this is a matter of concern. The richer the country, meaning a country that has a long historical record of greenhouse gas production, the richer they're likely to be, and that means they're more likely to have the resources to deal with the vagaries of said climate change. Strangely enough, I see the insurance industry in the more affluent societies driving change as much as government policies. Given the disasters we've lived through here since 2019, fires, floods and the pandemic, certain properties, household and commercial, will be uninsurable. No insurance pretty much means no mortgage and therefore stranded assets. The paradox of the affluent is this. Much household wealth is lodged in the family home. In this wide brown land of ours, it is not subject to property tax if it is the primary residence. Combine that with a runaway real estate boom and the percentage of wealth held in the family home has grown significantly. In poorer societies, a roof over one's head is just as important, but as a percentage of the household wealth, especially where land titles are questionable, it means less is invested in the structure. Now the difference between the average home price in Australia and a developing economy are truly staggering, and the idea that a property may be a stranded asset is a problem that many in this world would be glad to have. I do see our privilege. This, though, is of little concern to the individual whose home has been flooded 3 times in the last 18 months, and they can no longer afford the insurance if they can obtain it. So into this bubbling along background of rising global temperatures, we must add the conflicts around the world. From the website Global Citizen, quote, according to the Council on Foreign Relations Global Conflict Tracker, there are currently 27 ongoing conflicts worldwide. The tracker categorises conflict into 3 groups: worsening, unchanging and improving. Right now, there's not a single conflict described as improving. Of those worsening are the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Afghanistan, political instability in Lebanon, the war in Yemen, the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, and the conflict in Ethiopia. End quote. Food is, as ever, the underpinning of life. In 1906, Alfred Henry Lewis stated, there are only 9 meals between mankind and anarchy. 3 days without food, maybe 9, and social order is disrupted. And I'm assuming Lewis is referring to the anarchy the bourgeoisie consider disorder rather than the anarchy that filled Barcelona during George Orwell's early days in the Spanish Civil War. But either way, hunger will lead to great suffering. We have been through this as a species way too many times. And as reported in the Politico.eu article entitled, Experts Say Ukraine War Shows We Need a New Way to Feed the World, here's a longish quote. Quote, don't say you weren't warned. World leaders are scrambling to contain a food crisis spurred by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But experts say their response is gravely flawed as it repeats the failures of a broken model, setting countries up for similar crises in the future. They believe that as policymakers look to simply farm their way out of the crisis, They are over-relying on a few countries and a handful of companies to feed the world, leaving them ill-prepared for future shocks. More than a decade after the world emerged from the 2008 world food crisis, similarly brought on by a combination of rising oil prices, drought and trade restrictions imposed by panicked governments, including Ukraine, food experts are urging policymakers to rethink what we eat and how we grow it. In fact, they say that the West's response to the current crisis, which includes allowing farmers to grow on protected land, is already missing the mark, especially since farmers' heavy reliance on fertilisers and resource-intensive crops are adding to climate change. End quote. The centralisation of food production and the concentration of food distribution to a small number of companies has us, as a species, trapped in a system that produces more than enough food to feed everyone, but is a system perverted by the need to deliver shareholder value above all else. To give you some idea of this concentration and how this is putting human suffering in the sights of a global disaster, quote from the same article, "The supply system has been built in such a way that over 24 countries depend on a combination of only Russia and Ukraine for at least a third of their wheat. In some countries, like Lebanon and Egypt, that figure is 80%, while Eritrea last year sourced all its wheat from Russia and Ukraine." End quote. We must restart our gardens and we must grow locally. We must demand this of our political leaders. Grow, grow and grow some more. Join in this with others. Swap, sell, barter and buy. For we can, in those areas not in conflict, grow food of some sort. Veggies, herbs, eggs, rabbits, chooks, and larger animals and grains on bigger spaces. Find a community garden and grow with like-minded people. If you'd like help, the discount is still on the No Dig Gardening course over at World Organic News. It's still selling for $17, not the usual $149, until the world starts to return to a little more normality, which may take a lot longer than I had hoped, and many others too. So if you've been put off in the past, now's the time to jump in and learn. If you know anyone who'd be interested, and the more people we can get growing, the better, please let them know. I'll have a link in the show notes, or you can just go to worldorganicnews.com and click on the course tab. Please spread the word. We need to get as much food happening as possible, as close to the people eating it as we can. The best time to move from consumption to production was probably 50 years ago. Second best time is now. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be back next week.